You ever just spend 5 months playing the same single-player game? Not me. Maybe a couple months if it's a game I really love, but I am a man of variety, and I would like to move on to the next thing to broaden my horizons as much as possible. So, in the name of broadening my horizons, I decided to try a new experiment. Let's ask all my friends for one game recommendation, then I'll put them in a randomizer and commit myself to beating that game no matter what it is. Upon beating Dark Souls 3 and entering the recommendations into random.org, the resulting game was Dragon Age Inquisition. This was to be my very next adventure, a AAA fantasy RPG I knew almost nothing about. I knew it was made by BioWare, the same BioWare which once developed the Mass Effect series and now flounders in their own despair as they drain money and staff members. A downtrodden company recently known for the two massive flops called Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem. Oh, but this game was before their downfall, right before it, back in 2014 at the start of a new console generation. This would be the year that Inquisition was chosen as the Game Awards' first ever Game of the Year, which is no small feat looking at the competition from back then. It's the third and biggest entry in a successful series with a large fanbase, which seems odd because for being such a cult hit, I never hear anyone talk about it except for this one friend of mine who recommended it in the first place. So, with no exposure to it on the internet, I had nothing to go on, no preconceptions. And it was only $10 for a copy that includes all the DLC, so would it turn out to be worthy of Game of the Year despite all the competition? Or is it actually a niche $10 game that only my friend likes? Is it as disappointing as Mass Effect Andromeda? Or is it a Skyrim clone like the trailers would seem to suggest? Little could I have known that this $10 Blu-ray disc was going to take over my life for the next 5 months. With a game this long, the only way we can rightfully talk about it is from the start of the experience, and flying in the face of my total lack of expectations, Dragon Age Inquisition opens up with a scene of utter chaos that half expects you to have played the previous 2 games. Eventually, I would find my bearings and settle into this world, but it was not easy. My friend did not tell me to play Dragon Age 1 and 2 first, but if I had done so, I would have had the context to the world and characters that eluded me for my first couple dozen hours, and maybe the beginning would not have been quite so jarring. Inquisition opens up, as with many action RPGs, with a character creation menu, where you're bound to spend several hours if you actually care. And care you should. This is a very solid character creator. The detail is much greater than most I've seen before, and if you're doing it right, your avatar won't look very uncanny at all. There's great potential here to be aesthetically pleasing. First, you get to choose your own gender and race. You can play as human, skinny human, short human, or Kunari. And one of these is obviously the right answer. Now, this is a BioWare game. BioWare games are famous for their depth of choice and variability. Even your character's race and gender will wind up changing story paths and dialogue far down the road in completely unforeseeable ways. For example, if you choose Kunari, like I did, some stuck-up humans might be racist to you. If you choose Elf, your character may have an enhanced knowledge on Elven mythology and get an advantage in associating with Elven NPCs. Plus, the Dragon Age games have a major romance mechanic. Some characters are gay, some are straight, and most are bi. Oh, but they also have racial preferences. The Elven male character won't date anyone other than an Elven female, and the Elven female has no race preference, but she's a lesbian. And some characters are very hard to get, or their romance subplots will influence other missions later on, all depending on scenarios which may never even happen. Anyway, choose your gender and race very carefully, depending on what you actually want to take place in this story. It's all going to wind up canon, and there are serious consequences. It's definitely not an easy game to play casually, when everything you do matters so much, and you're expected to pay the utmost attention. But once your avatar is sorted, finally, the opening scene. You watch a temple explode without any context, and then your avatar escapes from a mysterious void through a portal, winding up in a jail cell where he or she is being interrogated on suspicion of being the one who just blew up that temple. Turns out, that was a super important temple, because peace negotiations were being held there in hopes of ending a war hosted by this world's equivalent to the Pope, Divine Justinia, who is now dead, assassinated by the explosion. Not only did the explosion kill the Divine, but it was a magical explosion which tore open a huge portal in the sky above it, and from this so-called breach are now swarming an unending outpour of demons. So, you following? War, peace negotiations, explosion, Divine assassinated, giant demon portal, and you're being interrogated because they think you did it. But now is no time for interrogations because demons are attacking the survivors. The remaining guards and officials are forced to ask your assistance in the battle, and by fighting alongside them, you eventually gain their trust and join their forces. It turns out that you were the only survivor inside that bombed temple, and when you were found and captured after the fact, there was a magical green mark branded on your hand, which is the only known tool capable of closing the green demon portals. With the Divine and many of her officials now dead, a number of her subordinates form a militia they call the Inquisition. And, as the only person capable of closing the demon portals, you get a privileged position within the leadership of this Inquisition, eventually proving your strategic worth and rising through the ranks. The Inquisition starts as a very small group who set out to close the big demon portal in the sky, but as the story progresses, it increases its numbers, spreads its influence, and becomes the de facto peacekeeping force for the entire continent during a time of extreme political destabilization. Over the extensive period of this grand saga, you, as the leader of the Inquisition, have to tackle many interesting and converging conflicts. How will you close the breach in the sky? How will you replace the assassinated Divine? How will you finish the peace negotiations that were interrupted? Which side will you take in the unrelated civil war in the western part of the continent? Etc., etc. It's an extremely lengthy plot occurring over a few years in universe, and taking its time to cover a multitude of story arcs. Eventually, a main antagonist is introduced, and they become a central figure within all of the conflicts, but as their identity is a secret not mentioned until quite a ways in, I won't bring it up for now. Dragon Age is a series of story-based games. I get that, it's story first and gameplay second. That's fine. I've only played one of them, but in my experience, it is absolutely the most thorough and complex story I've ever witnessed in a single piece of media. Game, book, movie, whatever. Even newer games like Elden Ring don't compare to the amount of content in Dragon Age Inquisition. This is over 2, maybe even 300 hours worth of potential story substance. And I didn't even see it all because it's not possible. Every potential storyline cannot be completed in the same playthrough, every location cannot be visited, all because of the diverging paths that are presented. The choices matter so heavily that entire story quests can be skipped, subverted, or altered depending on the whims of you as the Inquisitor, the central executive figure of this militia. In my story, for example, I skipped 2 entire boss battles by being diplomatic, and I only had that option due to my earlier choices. And not only do your choices matter in this game, they even matter in the last 2 games. Inquisition contains a feature whereby you can import your save data from the other 2 games, continuing unresolved plot threads from those old stories, very similar to Mass Effect. So, in Dragon Age Origins, for example, if your character marries another character, then their spouse may come back in Inquisition and share their memories of romantic adventure from 1. If they had a baby, that baby may be much older now, and even appear in their own dedicated story quest in Inquisition. If your character in Dragon Age 2 is female, they'll return in Inquisition as such. If they married X, Y, and Z, they'll discuss their relationship with X, Y, and Z. If they chose to blow up this building or assassinate that character in Dragon Age 2, the consequences of all of these decisions will be felt in Inquisition, where characters may die or be spared, or lore may be revealed or not, all depending on both your decisions in this game as well as decisions from much older games. In a literal sense, Dragon Age gives you the ability to build your own trilogy, And as amazing as that is, I never got to experience a bit of it. I had to play Inquisition on default story settings with none of the context of the last 2 episodes because I had no idea this was a thing until it was too late. If I had, then maybe I would have played the other 2 games first. Maybe. I mean, it would have been an enormous expense of my time, but it would have rounded out my adventures through this world completely, with all the context I could ever ask for. But this is not how my playthrough shaped out, and at this point, I may never experience this save data transferal feature, at least until the next game comes out. All this just goes to show how much content is in this freaking video game. My personal playthrough lasted over 170 hours, and no, none of that was inflated by me AFKing and leaving the app open. Those were 170 hours of active gameplay, of constant story, of barragement with details and dialogues and character arcs. 170 hours of content just to beat the game once. Never have I experienced a story game on this scale. Xenoblade X, that took me 180 hours, but I had already beaten the final boss at around 90. Dark Souls 3, I played that for 172 hours, but I had the final boss beaten at 120. But in Dragon Age Inquisition, the final boss was beaten on one of my last sessions. It was one of the last things I ever did before uninstalling, because Inquisition's length, at least for me, was not inflated by artificial grinds or unlockables or achievements. Even though it has those things, it's genuinely just like the longest single-player game ever. Note, I am a very patient player of games, and I don't stop playing until I think I've seen everything I wanted to see. So in Inquisition, I did take the time to do most of the interesting side quests. If you skipped all of those, you could totally beat it in half the time I did, but I don't regret doing the side quests because there's so much of the world building I would have missed otherwise. They're not simple fetch quests. Many of them involve discovering new dungeons or regions of the world. I found a lot of them to be really fun. I would compare the game to Xenoblade in that it feels like a one-player MMO. In fact, I would compare it to Xenoblade in a multitude of ways. They're both lengthy, semi-open-world action RPGs with a plethora of technical issues. They're both heavy in side quests. They both have a rich supporting cast of characters with their own personal affinity-building quests. And these games even have similar battle mechanics where you choose your attacks from a group of slots at the bottom of the screen. But still, Dragon Age is not Xenoblade, not in tone, atmosphere, story. Whereas Xenoblade is a high-concept, abstract anime adventure, Dragon Age is a toned-down, realistic, traditional fantasy world. Like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, you can expect to encounter your typical dragons and swords and sorcery. I admire the scope of Dragon Age and how every corner of it is part of a livable, lovable world filled with content, extremely good environment design, but I must comment on how unoriginal it sometimes feels. It's just set in such a basic fantasy world. I mean, looking at this gameplay right now, I'm sure you would agree it's pretty, but it is just a traditional European-style fantasy. Where's the Lovecraftian monsters, the impossible architecture, the incredible landscapes, the giant Gundam suits? For the most part, it's just not here, and for the longest time, for the first few dozen hours, that was boring to me. I thought it was too plain, and maybe based on this footage, you would agree? Thankfully, the world was so beautiful it gave me the power to press on. I was really impressed with the small details in the open world that make it so realistic. The houses, the furnishing, the differences in architecture, the geology. Inquisition's world design is legitimately superior to 2022's Elden Ring, and its graphics are more realistic than Bloodborne, which came out 5 months later. Simply beautiful. While the world may have seemed plain in the beginning, it was still immersive, and I love an immersive game where the whole world just seems like it really exists, it's really here. I can assure you that the level design does get much more creative in the later stages, and all those epic, visually mind-blowing things I was talking about eventually appear during mid to late game quests when I was genuinely excited to be exploring the environments that I did. But at that point, for some people, I imagine it could easily be a case of too little too late. I mean, almost no one plays that far in Inquisition if you look at the trophy statistics. The trophy for finishing the story is rarer than Bloodborne's Platinum trophy. Inquisition just happens to be such a massive undertaking and an intense test of sheer patience that most people statistically can't handle it. They spend maybe 30, 40 hours riding their horse around the fields, killing some demons, walking through some castles. They see the game is taking too long to get anywhere good, and these people give up. I don't blame them. Would you want to be like me and let this become your second life for 5 months? Well, maybe you are that kind of person. Maybe you're a hardcore gamer and you're watching this video going like, he took 5 months to play 170 hours? What a frickin' slowpoke. I could do that in 1 month. Oh, but believe me, these were not a casual, laid-back 170 hours. It was not Animal Crossing. Those were hours I spent reading, discussing with characters, paying attention to the lore, sometimes taking notes, making discoveries, watching cutscenes, battling bosses. There was no slow moment. There was always a big new story mission or an important side quest that I was obligated to fulfill. When I played Dark Souls 1 for 210 hours, I was able to do that in 2 months because most of the time there wasn't much going on. It was a hardcore game when it needed to be, but after I got used to it, it became a casual walk in the park. I was able to turn it on whenever I felt like it, whether I had just gotten out of bed, or I had a headache, or I had school in a couple hours, or I was chatting with a friend. It didn't matter. But not Dragon Age Inquisition. This is 170 hours of work. Like, real work, like chores. Ask yourself if you would want to commit to this. Certainly this series is for some people. Dragon Age is the ideal game for someone who has a lot of free time and they want to escape their life to live in a fantasy world. If you want to live in your own epic saga in a complex isekai and learn everything about it, this is exactly the game for you. There's heroes, monsters, romance, drama, everything you could ask for, and you get to be the central figure in all of it. I'm sure I would have had much more investment in it if I hadn't felt like I had anything better to do. But at times, I really did. Only halfway through the story, I got severely burnt out, and I took some time off, escaping the escape to play much more laid-back games that didn't take so much energy from me. I had time to get good at Rainbow Six Siege and The Binding of Isaac. I talked with friends on Discord, and when they asked what I was going to do today, I would always tell them, I'm going to try to make a little more progress in Dragon Age today. Readers would love this game. If you're not much of a hardcore gamer, but you loved reading A Song of Ice and Fire, well, here you go. Here's the same thing in playable form. It really is the most book-like video game outside the visual novel genre. And a large part of that is just because it unironically contains hundreds of pages of reading in the form of unlockable codex entries, basically extended versions of the flavor text from Dark Souls. I kid you not. Just for the sake of Dragon Age Inquisition, the team at BioWare composed hundreds of original short stories, profiles, essays, character bios, poems, song verses, even religious texts and scientific journals, even a little bit of conlang. And yes, you guessed it, some of the reading materials can change depending on the path in your story. If you had character XYZ hook up with character 123, then guess what? Their codex page is going to be updated with a whole poem that details their romance. This all feels extreme for a person who doesn't read very many novels, but I can't bring myself to knock the game for containing so much literature. After forcing myself to read every codex entry I unlocked, most of them honestly aren't even that bad. Like, for instance, the poems are well composed. Honey-tongued was Thelm to Tyrda, gifts of gold and steel to start. Wanted Tyrda's men for warriors, stolen tribe from stolen heart. Cold her tribe, the gold hand counseled, lean from winter's wind knife chill. Be my bride and cross the waking, eat the gilden city's fill. Tyrda bright-axe, fraught with fury, crystal axe-head stirred to blaze, heeded well her leaf-eared lover, unabashed by lustful gaze. None shall break my tribe apart, not with demon words that kill. Fear my fury's fiery rays, dream words lie their thirst unslaking. And some of the short stories had very clever or funny moments. What is green? Imagine I should present to you an object which, to my mind, is of indisputable greenness, and ask, does this thing appear to you to be green? Naturally, you might say that it does, for you have come to recognize the appearance of the color of the objects to be green, associating the word with what your eyes see. But could it be my understanding of green differs entirely from yours? What if, perchance, you could see into my mind? You might realize that all things that I name green are actually red in your understanding. Ah, without the moorings of objective truth, we are set adrift in oceans of solitary experience. The promising opening to a lecture given by Karsten Groke, philosopher-poet at the University of Orlais. The lecture's quality dropped significantly after this point and ended quickly when Groke subjected audience members to a poorly constructed ode to chartreuse. He fled from the auditorium under fire from students armed with overripe red tomatoes. But, worst case scenario, sometimes you just get a codex entry where a dwarf describes what lunch his coworker ate on a Saturday. A sand-covered note. Lephus, I expected the wagon we sent out to the canyons to return to the watchtower by evening. It is now past noon. That it does not take a half day to travel from camp to camp should be obvious, but if no one has the sense to be alarmed, look for them immediately upon finishing this letter. Take archers with you. Those spiders in the canyons seem to fear nothing but that screeching monster to the east. I'll be by the four pillars, Devrenix. The codex ranges wildly from interesting to funny to mind-numbingly boring, but very little of it is actually bad. It expands significantly on the story in often enjoyable ways, if you like reading, but it also constantly interrupts gameplay with huge walls of text that were partially responsible for extending this game's length. If I had to guess, I'd say maybe 15% of my entire playthrough was just reading. Definitely brace yourself for this before you consider playing. Although, the Codex is not the only place that the writing team gets to show off their work. Inquisition features a strong cast of fully voice-acted characters. Genuinely, I believe the characters are the strongest part of the whole game. Like, Bravely Default or Grand Theft Auto 5, it wouldn't be nearly as enjoyable if they weren't so well written and well casted. Dragon Age introduces us to a sincerely charming ensemble of heroes whose personalities shine through cutscenes, conversations, and field banter. Look, you guys, there's a YouTube compilation of all the audio bites that playable characters can utter while exploring the overworld, and that video is 5.5 hours long. That's 5.5 hours of voice acting material specifically for slow moments during overworld exploration. And yes, it does change depending on your gender, and your race, and your romantic partner, and your progress in the story. They scripted and voice acted countless hours of dialogue which you're never going to see all of in one playthrough, and the writers did not skimp out. What these characters have to say is actually really entertaining.
Must grind your gristle, the Elder One is some crazy vintage, huh?
I'm not thrilled to discover we should take those old legends at face value.
Guess he thinks the modern Imperium is a real letdown, too.
Why wouldn't he? Tevinter once covered all Thedas, its glory only matched by its depravity. It'd be like Koslan showing up and learning the Canary didn't conquer the world after all.
Yes. Priesthood's been trying to explain that one for centuries.
As for the main cast, the tethers between this game's world and you, well, you've got Cassandra, a butch and socially awkward warrior lady with a thick accent who's also a high-ranking clergywoman, Cassandra, who appeared in Dragon Age 2, is one of the founding members of the Inquisition, but she's terribly bored with all the office work she's forced to put up with. Cassandra much prefers to go out on the field and keep an eye on the Inquisitor. She may have a guarded way of interacting with you, but she's one of the more enjoyable characters to be around. Do the right side quests for her, and she can use her connections to influence the story in massive ways. In my story, she became one of Thedas' most important leaders at the end.
Have you heard from any of your Kirkwall associates, Varric?
You're asking me? So you don't read my letters?
You're no longer my prisoner, much as you like to act like it.
Yet I still get all the suspicion.
I am not without sympathy, especially given recent events.
Why, Seeker, I would never accuse you of having sympathy. By the way, I tend to refer to my associates as friends. Maybe you're not familiar with the concept.
Varric, who was playable in Dragon Age 2 and best buds with the former protagonist Hawke, is a clever and amicable dwarven author with a great sense of sarcastic humor. He comes from the city of Kirkwall and has connections with dwarven merchants' guilds, but he's not very proud of his dwarven heritage. He has a reputation with Cassandra for being a mischievous type, but around the Inquisitor he appears to have a great deal of respect. He was always chill and fun in my company, one of my favorite characters to take out onto the field. He doesn't participate in romance, but he wields a unique crossbow weapon that balances out the team with some ranged power. Outside the battlefield, Varric also has a lot of comedic moments involving his novels.
By the end of Hard in Hightown, almost every character is revealed as a spy or a traitor.
Wait, you read my book?
It was in the Inquisition library. Everyone but Donnan turned out to be in disguise. Is that common?
Are we still talking about books, or are you asking if everyone I know is a secret agent?
Are there many tricksters in dwarven literature?
A handful, but they're the exception. Mostly they're just honoring the ancestors. It's very dull stuff. Human literature. Now there's where you'll find the tricky, clever, really deceitful types.
Curious.
Not really. Dwarves write how they want things to be. Humans write to figure out how things are.
The new elven mage character, Solus, creeped me out at first. I heard a couple players I know say that he was one of their favorite characters. It took me a long time to understand why. At first glance, he was just an off-putting, quiet bookworm with an odd face and a secret past life he would never talk about. But as my only mage character for the longest time, I took him with me everywhere I went, eventually getting to know him better. He's actually a really cool dude, all in touch with the world and stuff. He's an expert in the arcane arts and the spiritual plane known as the Fade. Very useful in battle, and if he warms up to you, he'll shed a huge light on the more mysterious parts of the story. Plus, he always has something poignant and sarcastic to share.
You've got an odd style, Solus. Your spells are a bit different from the Circle Mages, or the Vince.
That comes from being self-taught. I discovered most magic on my own, or learned it from my journeys in the Fade.
I've seen self-taught warriors. Even the good ones have something awkward in their style, something that clunks. I don't get that from you. Maybe magic is different.
Or, without magical training, you cannot notice the parts of my magic that clunk.
Iron Bull is my favorite character. I think his race is based on the Ottoman Empire. He's like having an observant religious friend with a surprisingly good sense of humor. Very serious about his strict religious practices, but also a self-aware party animal who values friends more than tradition. He has a great voice actor and concept design, and he's such a fun dude. Unfortunately, he's not as involved in side quests as some of the other heroes, but he, along with Varric and Solus, was another one of my most commonly used fighters. And he had an adorable platonic relationship with Sera. Bull is useful to bring along whenever the Kunari are involved.
Hey, Sera, a few fights back, did you hit someone through my horns?
Probably. Great if I did, huh? What, you afraid I'll stick your head by mistake?
What? No, I trust you. I'm just thinking, if you can pull off tricks like that, maybe we can use this. I lock somebody's arms, get my head down, and you go through the horns for his throat.
Ew, you're taking all the fun out of it.
Sera is a really bratty thief with a very good voice actress whose manner of speech would suggest this character has severe ADHD, and that she does, specifically written to shuffle her words around and be hard to follow. Sera confused me at first. If it were my choice, I would never have invited her to the Inquisition, but I only did so because I could tell she was a main character, and to reject her would be to miss out on a lot of story content. She's such an odd fit for this organization, stealing people's items and sometimes killing innocents for rubbing her the wrong way. She uses a bow and arrow, making her the only ranged non-magic user other than Varric. Sera is one of the most unique characters. Not really an expert on anything but combat. She's abrasive, angry, a useful fighter, good company if you want to hear some snarky conversation between her and Bull, or Blackwall.
Still on about Milady Josie and her tricky tongue, and I've been thinking again. Shut up. Here's how I'll do it too. I find a knob right, and I seduce him.
You'll what? I worry where this might be going.
Wait, not done yet. He thinks he's being seduced, but when it's time for slap and tickle, I jump up and say, I like your wife better.
And the goal would be?
He thinks he's in charge, but he isn't. I am.
I don't know what to say.
Then I'll punch him to make sure he gets it.
Oh, Sera, I do love you.
Blackwall is a member of the Grey Wardens, a company of knights who have worked across borders to save Thedas during multiple strenuous points in its history. In my opinion, Blackwall is the least developed hero. He's a good man, but also a fairly average military commander. Just sort of an army dude. He's somewhat of an expert on the Grey Wardens, the Blights, and the Darkspawn, so he's a must-have for any missions that involve those particular things. Other than that, not quite as good a warrior as Iron Bull. I'm sorry, Blackwall. You just make things a little awkward when your specialty isn't coming into play. But again, sometimes he has some funny lines with Sera.
You enjoy mocking my involvement with the Inquisition. What about yours? People like you, nobles, you send men to do your dirty work, your killing. And here you are, getting your hands dirty. Curious.
There is nothing curious about it. So much is at stake. Why would I leave any of it to someone else?
Vivian is a high-class jerk that nobody likes. I think it's like a point in the Dragon Age community that nobody likes this character, and personally, I almost never bothered taking her to battle. She's useless, an inferior mage to Solus that has nothing to say that isn't hurtful. She doesn't get along with people, even in-universe. As someone who comes from a noble or Legion background, she is an expert on that, so it's your choice whether to bring her on missions that involve or Legions or nobles in general. But she's a snob. Not much to contribute, doesn't even want to romance you.
I don't understand Celine and Gaspard.
I shall try to suppress my shock.
There's no hurt. Nothing there touched you.
Did you expect me to get misty-eyed over who rose to glory and who paid the price, Demon? It is the game. No matter what transpired at the Winter Palace, I took steps to strengthen my position.
How do you make a game that you always win?
Practice.
Cole is a ghost. He is a spirit taken human form who comes to you with a lot to learn about what it's like to be normal. He does not understand personhood. He does not understand conversation or social norms or emotions. He's not one of the most fun characters to hang out with. He has a lot of panic attacks over his conflicted existence, but his background is the catalyst for a lot of interesting story events with other characters. Put him in the same party with Solus or Bull or Varric or pretty much anyone, and funny situations will arise. It's because he sees things from a different perspective and asks a lot of questions that nobody else would think to say. He's written with a lot of piercing wit that he doesn't even realize that he has. Cole can peer into people's minds too and help them in subtle ways. He just wants to help, but he's mistrusted and he doesn't fit in well. Cole gets some great character development over the course of his own side quests. Definitely pair him up with Solus when possible.
Do you need to eat, Cole? Or sleep?
I thought I had to, but I don't. The old songs can pull me.
That's something. I don't know what, but it's something. What about when you're injured? Why do you bleed? Is it because you think you have to?
Is that why you bleed?
Yes. You have me there.
Dorian is a cutie. Hailing from the Empire of Tevinter, a generally evil place which acts as a minor antagonist in this series, Dorian is generally considered one of the good Tevinters. He's a well-studied mage like Solus, although his background as a human Tevinter necromancer and son of a nobleman is a heavy contrast. I used Dorian as my main mage through most of the second half of the game, although he's not as good in a support role as Solus or Vivian. He's definitely on the blacker side of mages, and might I add, ranged characters like Dorian, Solus, and Varric are absolutely overpowered. I played as a melee warrior myself, but the moment I switched to one of my ranged boys, I felt like I could just sit out the fight while my warriors took the damage for me. It really was that easy. I recommend against playing mage or rogue if you're looking for a challenge, although these roles are still fun. Anyway, as for Dorian, it took me a long time to realize this, but if you hang out with him enough, raise his affinity, and do some side quests, he has potential to become one of the Inquisitor's closest friends. In my playthrough, he got buddy-buddy with me, and it was nice. He's genuinely cool and smart, and definitely who you want to bring on a mission that involves his people, the Tevinters, which make up quite a few of the mid-game missions. And one more thing, he's definitely the character to go after if you're aiming for a gay romance, but I was playing as a woman, so not my thing.
Do you think they'll actually make you divine?
It seems anything is possible these days.
It's so odd. Like waiting for the Chantry Fairy to appear. Congratulations, you're the ruler.
We do not engage in pitched battle for the position as you do in Tevinter.
The successor must prove he could slaughter his enemies. He doesn't actually do it. We're not savages.
Indeed. The slaughter occurs after he becomes divine.
That's considered housekeeping.
Lastly, there are the main leaders of the Inquisition aside from yourself. The 3 highest-ranking officers who advise the Inquisitor on administrative matters and also have their own personalities and side quests and romances and character arcs. They're not playable, but they're still a part of the main cast. Josephine is the Inquisition's ambassador. She works on everything political. Have questions about a foreign kingdom, have to make a deal with a noblewoman across the way. Josephine is the woman to go through. She makes deals and knows pretty much everything there is to know about politics, and she's very nice, and friends with Leliana. Leliana, who was a playable character in Dragon Age Origins, is the Inquisition's spy master. She commands the spies, but she also is a spy. Leliana is a master of information, stealth missions, and secrets. Need something done very clandestinely? You go through her. She always has an elite agent for the job. But her method of doing things comes in conflict with the other 2 officers, as she's more illicit and off the books than Josephine, but also the commander of less forceful and directly powerful forces than Cullen's soldiers. Leliana is also massively religious. Along with Cassandra, Leliana was once a high-ranking member of the clergy who worked at Divine Justinia's side. Leliana's a bit edgy. She can be a bother, always eavesdropping on everything you do and making big deals out of things, but she's there to do all the dirty work, and she's very intelligent. Cullen is the commander of the Inquisition's army. Cullen is a former member of the Order of Templars, a military faction of the Church who stand in opposition to the apostate mages. As the conflict between Templars and mages is a major part of this story, Cullen has distanced himself from the rebel Templars to make himself useful trying to save the world with the Inquisition. Like Blackwall, he's experienced in training knights, issuing commands, and sending squads out to the corners of the continent to accomplish various peacekeeping jobs. Cullen's also a strong choice if you're looking for a straight romance as a female. Just a very charming and conversational individual, but he also has a character flaw. As part of his Templar training, he has become hooked on a very unhealthy performance-enhancing drug. This comes into play for both his character arc and some Templar-related side quests. Cullen sure is a likable guy, but after the drugs thing I kinda stayed away from him. Guess that makes me a bad friend.
I'm still surprised you put such effort into staffing a fortress in Crestwood of all places.
The village as a strategic location, one that few would suspect us to hold so tightly.
A place like this serves no purpose without enough people to make the running worthwhile.
Every one of these heroes has a perfectly casted voice actor, and with so many hours of dialogue, it never gets old listening to them interact.
So, Sera, a few fights ago, there was this one guy. I had his leg wounded, his shield down.
Oh, him, yeah. You're welcome.
Yeah, see, I had him. I was winding up for the killing blow and everything. You didn't need to take him.
I wanted to see if I could get him without hitting you.
What I'm saying is, please stop stealing my kills, Sera.
That's not a thing. Get faster.
All right, you're not stealing, you're helping. Kill helping, that's fine.
When I was first getting into Inquisition, playing the very early story missions, I kept complaining to my friend that the story was bland, and it was boring me. At its worst points, it started to feel like a soap opera. But I'm telling you, it did pick up. Eventually. As I reached more interesting locations and I got familiarized with my adventuring party, I started getting really into it. It reminded me of the JRPGs I love, the ones that got my attention and immersed me by putting such funny and sympathetic people at my side. Really, believable and dynamic characters. That's what sells games like this. There's nothing better you can ask for in a long-form story. Still, even with these people at my side to provide some levity and welcome insight, my playthrough took ages and ages, and a few periods of heavy burnout. You know what didn't help? This game has severe technical problems. And what a surprise, right? Just like Xenoblade. Getting into any open-world game or large, story-driven action RPG, you should expect technical problems. But it's so bad in this game, it breaks my immersion. Because in every cutscene, at every moment when you should be fully enjoying the story, there's always something going wrong. Whether it be textures loading improperly, objects floating, characters shuffling in strange positions that you can't take them seriously in. This game's technical side sucks. I can't even explain it all. There are so many one-off glitches that just throw you off. It's bizarre. Like the time I got on my mount and then started moving in random directions while the camera didn't follow me, and then my game crashed. Or the time this happened. Or this. Or this. It just needs mentioning that in every play session I had of Inquisition, I encountered technical problems. I lagged, I bugged, my game crashed, it was terrible. And I had audio problems too. No matter how I adjusted the audio settings, some sound bites were way louder than others, which made playing this with headphones obnoxious. But the worst technical element of all, by far, is not even a glitch or mistake, but just how badly the characters are animated. I know it has dozens of hours of cutscenes, so asking for fully animated everything like FF7 Remake is a bit much for a 2014 game, but still, I could not handle how bad this is. How bad everyone looks when they speak. It looks bad. I don't know what else to say. Take a look at what you're seeing right now. Imagine it being just like this for 170 hours, and let me know if you think you couldn't take it seriously either. It's not a cinematic marvel by any stretch. Inquisition's battle system is pretty technically flawed too. It's a neat battle system with various classes, skill trees, many diverse abilities, the option to switch which character you control, and a top-down mode that freezes time to give you access to more specific commands than the real-time mode. It's pretty well designed overall, but once you get really deep into it, you see it's not a really well-oiled machine. Some abilities are too strong, some abilities are useless. The character you control always takes far more damage than the AI-controlled characters. Enemies only seem to chase and target the character you're controlling, and Warrior in specific is just a damage sponge. The obvious role of Warrior is to be a frontline tank that prevents the squishies from dying, but by comparison, playing Mage or Rogue makes you feel invincible because you get to stay out of the fight, while the AI-controlled warriors take nearly no damage. So, actually choosing to play Warrior seems like a foolish move, but it's the only way to add any challenge to the battles because Rogue and Mage just seem so cheap. I myself played two-handed Warrior as opposed to the shield option, and I was surprised how heavily my moveset involved stunning the enemy. It was odd. Most of my attacks knocked them to the ground, staggering them. Many non-boss enemies stood no chance against me and my team, as I kept them perpetually pinned to the ground, and my ranged companions set them on fire, froze them, electrified them, and blasted them. The later parts of the game had stupendously difficult battles. I eventually discovered that your teammates respawn if you simply flee from the battle, and Warrior is the only one with an ability that allows them to sprint, so I could just dip and resurrect my teammates anytime I wanted, with little chance of the enemy following me. It's an interesting battle system, but not the best. I think Warriors should be more survivable, Rogues and Mages should be less safe, sticking to their one-trick pony strategy of shooting from the backline. The enemies should focus equally on each teammate rather than just the one you're controlling, and there shouldn't be so many moves that stun. There's also a very intricate weapon and armor crafting / customization feature that I spent a long time figuring out but never really enjoyed. The armor and weapon system is so deep and yet not really necessary to mess with in order to succeed, and your item carrying capacity is very limited. It felt like a massive chore every time I had to organize my inventory when it got full, and it became difficult because I would find these strange items in the valuables category that seemed like something important that I should keep, but I could never figure out what to do with them. Most of the enemies themselves really aren't very good. It's very important in any game, in my opinion, where combat is a heavy feature, that there's a large variety of enemies to fight. And in Inquisition, there are some standouts, but it has you fight far too many of the same demons. It's a huge, huge semi-open world game with 6 types of demons that you're gonna see in every level, everywhere you go. Combat gets highly repetitive, and in the late game areas, there are several super duper unfair encounters, either ones where a single enemy has too much HP, or several strong enemies are placed in one room. There were occasions where I had almost no choice but to resort to calculated cheese tactics, like the times I would switch to my mage Dorian and shoot the enemy at a distance in a spot where they couldn't reach me. Over the course of this long, long adventure, I met many companions, I read dozens of codex entries, and I explored every region of the continent, some much more interesting than others. The exploration element could either be an immersive delight or a slow and uneventful crawl. The battles were strategic, but repetitive. Much of the story was slow-paced, interspersed with enjoyable highlights, but also several awkward and hilariously bad moments. And eventually, I got to the final boss. In the final base story mission, my game crashed twice. I'm about to show the video of one of the actual crashes, which was during a major cutscene. This is heavy spoilers, so Please skip to this timestamp if you don't want spoilers for the base game's ending. 3, 2, 1...
I knew you would come.
It ends here, Corypheus.
And so it shall.
Huh? Hello? This is ridiculous. In this final mission, the glitches were worse than ever before. And when it finally didn't crash, the final boss itself was an underwhelming and by-the-books enemy encounter by the standards of any other action RPG, which just highlighted how utterly unoriginal this antagonist was. If you were to imagine the single most evil-looking person ever, and give them all the powers of Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time, that's this game's villain. And I would think much more highly of the story if only they had swapped him out for a more interesting antagonist. Seriously, it was a big flaw with the game to me. Such an interesting story, culminating around such a bad villain. Oh, mega cliché. But the final fight was what it was. It was fun-ish, and it was a climax of sorts. Although the main conflict was finally settled, I knew Dragon Age was far from over. I carried on from there and spent real-life weeks wrapping up all the unfinished side quests, traveling around the world to tie loose ends, exploring all the environments, killing all the dragon super bosses, and equipping the best gear I could find. And it was only then that the game really started. I had finally reached the best parts of Inquisition. Unfortunately, parts which very few people ever get to see. I'm talking about the DLC expansions, which increase the story's length dramatically by offering us the most beautiful levels and most thrilling story arcs yet. I'm not kidding, I love the DLC. It had taken so long, but my adventure was finally starting to seem worth it, because in these DLC expansions is where I undoubtedly had the most fun. First released was Jaws of Hakon, where the Inquisition travels to the far south to interact with tribes of mountain-dwelling humans called the Avar. Here you uncover some mysteries surrounding Dragon Age's ancient history, fight some very challenging battles, and watch a bunch of awesome plot twist scenes, all while exploring the most beautiful wooded area in the game. This is a fantastic DLC. I thoroughly loved the new level and lore. Next, in The Descent, the Inquisition gets to travel farther underground than any non-dwarves before them, into an expanse of uncharted and abandoned dwarven cities that have been overrun with demons for centuries. This DLC is intense. It's dark, it's large, it features David Hayter as one of the new NPCs.
You join the Legion knowing you're already dead. You don't fear the killing blow. We rest in the stone and pass our strength back to her. That's our reward. But the Darkspawn defiled these soldiers. They can't return to the stone. They'd only weaken her.
And the DLC includes a lot of hyper-difficult battles where I sometimes resorted to cheese tactics to win. At various points, I thought The Descent was reminiscent of Dark Souls in its creepy, subterranean, non-linear level design, its surreal visuals, its abundance of zombies and demons, and its ridiculous difficulty. The Descent was a very satisfying side adventure that, similar to Jaws of Hakon, both raised and answered many questions for the series' lore. Finally, the last major DLC was Trespasser. And Trespasser is a trip. It's not as hard as The Descent, but it is more intense, and it's also the best part of this game. If every bit of Inquisition were as good as Trespasser, I would have no reservation in recommending the game to everybody. Trespasser was made to be the final story mission of Dragon Age 3, taking place 2 years after the so-called final boss was slain. In Trespasser, you, the Inquisitor, get to reunite with all the familiar faces of the characters you love. Not that you ever left if you play all parts of this game back to back, but it's still so refreshing to catch up with these people and find out where their lives have taken them post-main conflict, after the time skip. Depending on the decisions you made in the base game, there's now a new Divine in charge, the Inquisition is close to fulfilling its role in the world, and some characters show up with new love interests. A few characters might not show up at all if you let them die before the time skip. And if you chose a romance partner, you may even get the option to marry them in this DLC. Once the heartwarming reunions are over, the plot really gets going. A series of events takes place that winds up threatening the existence of the Inquisition, and you get to travel to some very exotic locations battling some unpredictable enemies to resolve this new conflict. Some grippingly hard bosses are fought, and in an extraordinarily climactic and emotional moment, you get to witness Inquisition's true ending. Your reward for making it this far, a moment much better than the base game's ending. Don't spoil it for yourself. The Trespasser DLC can be easily spoiled if you go googling stuff about Inquisition's story. Try to avoid searching more than you need to decide whether playing this game is worth it. But Trespasser wraps up the story in the most perfect way I could have hoped for. It's actually one of my favorite video game endings that I've ever seen. It has everything: character development, closure for different arcs, reunions, climactic battles, questions answered, new questions raised, and one more conflict introduced to be left for a sequel. With a series of callbacks all the way to the explosion at the Divine Conclave, the door is definitively opened for Dragon Age 4 to begin. When I finally beat Inquisition, I couldn't believe that it was over. It had become a fixture of my daily routine, and I didn't know what to do next. And after that day, I began every morning for weeks thinking about its ending. I would love to see how it gets concluded, if it ever does. Apparently, Dragon Age 4 has been in the dumps for the last 6 years, stuck in development heck, as EA drags BioWare through the mud, and the previous heads of Dragon Age's story leave the team. Plus, BioWare is also apparently working on Mass Effect 4, but the future of this company as a whole is very much jeopardized. Since Inquisition, BioWare's only major games have been critically panned flops that waste development time and funding. BioWare is losing steam. Dragon Age 4's development was infamously brought back to the drawing board in an incident when the parent company, EA, was upset that it featured no support for microtransactions. Even if Dragon Age 4 isn't permanently cancelled, there's a solid chance it could still suck due to mismanagement, and that would be embarrassing. We can't have that. I do not want for the follow-up to Trespasser to be bad, because at this point, I care now. I want to see what happens next in my favorite fantasy soap opera, but I don't know if it can be helped at this point. The future of Dragon Age is a sad thing to think about. Dragon Age Inquisition filled the same role for me as Xenoblade Chronicles X. For multiple months, it was at the center of a whole chapter in my life. It presents an escapist world that will take you over if that's what you want it to do. If you volunteer, you will spend an enormous chunk of your time on the continent of Thedas, where you will work with a team of legendary heroes to rebuild the foundations of a collapsing society. You will patch together a hole in the sky, defeat an army of demons, save entire empires from civil war, and in the end, you will be rewarded with adventures and discoveries in the most unique corners of the world. But it takes commitment to get there, to the good parts. It takes so much from you, especially if you're even a little not into it. If you're thinking that this sucks, or it's not realistic enough, or it's too realistic and it's getting a little boring, you could get burnt out and not want to keep going. And that's fine for you. You have your own tastes, but its length doesn't work in this game's favor. There were times I felt like it was all worth it, but there were also moments in between when I wished it would be over already. There were fun battles, but there was also monotonous sword swinging. There were laugh-out-loud character moments, but there were also cheesy soap opera-like cutscenes that were terribly animated. And there were lovable characters, but there was also one of the least inspired antagonists I have ever seen, who was only a detriment to this game's cool factor. It's a game of extremes. It's a game of severe ups and downs, admirable levels of genuine creative expression and talent, but also a sea of little things that kept breaking my immersion and seemed to indicate that this game was actually rushed together behind schedule to make a buck because mighty EA wanted to capitalize on the demand. I see so much room for improvement in Inquisition. It's like the game is good, but it needed a little more time in the oven. For something so long, you would expect it to exceed in every way. So it gets hard to put up with when you're coming in day after day just to see the same glitches and mistakes. For such a long commitment, you would expect it to be more consistently fun, but it's only fun sometimes. I would have them polish the code, fix the glitches, animate these cutscenes properly with some more motion capture, throw in some spice to the battle system, and just completely rewrite the antagonist, like back to square one. In the grand scope, this is actually quite a small list of things that would go the extra mile to make Inquisition truly fantastic, a word I would not quite use to describe it in reality. I rate Dragon Age Inquisition 7 out of 10. I believe it's a very good option if you're looking to sink your time into a fantasy adventure, like if you have a summer break with absolutely nothing to do. If you're a book lover, a Game of Thrones watcher, a romantic, Dragon Age has something for you. But if you're a casual gamer, or a fast-paced FPS player, someone who only has so much time and wants a quick diversion, then just no. I wouldn't say it's worth the investment. But despite that, my experience was at times beautiful, funny, and intense. I'm glad I had this change of pace I brought into my horizons, and I'm always going to remember the characters I met along the way, even if the other, less fun parts fade out from my memory. Now, next time I have someone else choose what game I get to play, I really hope it's something under 20 hours.